Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome back to this episode 7 in the series where we are learning about HANA and the Cloud Application Programming Model by rebuilding the sample application pretty much from scratch and looking in great detail as we go along the way. Now, just to recap a little bit of where we left off, we have, of course, built our core data model and we've set up our basic security. We've even done a little bit where we've already exposed that data model, the mostly CDS-based data model through OData services as well. Like I said, really just so we can test a little bit. We haven't gotten in deep into the server side. We're pretty much focused at this point on the database level so far. We have done some more complex scenarios like accessing a regular non-HDI schema from outside of our project, and we've added a second HDI container and database module to our project, and then seeing how we can connect that up and access that data from our main database module as well. And those scenarios required setting up grants and synonyms, all those kinds of good things. We've seen all that up to this point. And in today's episode, we want to continue developing at the database level, but now we really want to go into the creation of calculation views in detail. And this is going to be a little bit of a time-sensitive episode in that hopefully in the very near future, we do get the ability to do calculation view editing in the Business Application Studio. But right now, at the time of the recording of this particular episode, we don't have that functionality yet, and we do need to go back over to the SAP Web IDE in order to really be able to do calculation view development. Everything else we've done so far and that we'll continue to do after this point, we can pretty much do in the Business Application Studio. But for this one step, we'll see how to go back over to the Web IDE, share some little tips and tricks with you that makes that process of going back and forth a little bit easier. But once again, hopefully in a couple months after this video comes out, you won't need to do any of these extra steps, and you'll just be able to do your calculation view development from the Business Application Studio as well. But for now, it's important to see how we can do it in this environment. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into our content for this episode. All right, before we get into the main content of the week, I actually have a little bit of news, event-based news that I want to share with you. Hopefully many of you are already aware that we have Devtoberfest going on right now. So Devtoberfest 2020 from SAP, basically an 8-week celebration for developers where we're doing a large amount of free online education in the form of videos, follow-along exercises that you can do, office hours where you can come and ask questions with and chat with our experts. We're trying to do as much of this in a very interactive way as we can, but yet design it all so it can be done asynchronously on your own schedule. We know, in the environment that we're all working in these days, that we have to shift our hours, and we're consuming a lot of content from home. And really, this event is designed with that in mind. There's another aspect to the event as well, and that's a contest portion where we really want to encourage you to participate in or start your own open source project and build something in that open source project that gives something back to the SAP developer community. So, the challenge is really come up with some pain point that you have in your own development life, and solve it. Whether that's a tooling extension, whether that's a source code sample or a reusable library or whatever. This is your perfect opportunity if you've never done an open source project, or you've been thinking about doing it, or you just like to contribute to some of them that are already out there. And there's some great projects out there that can be contributed to. you have an opportunity here to really be recognized by the rest of the community. We're going to promote the projects that participate in this contest. We're going to let the community vote on which ones they think is the best, and then at TechEd there'll be an opportunity to really highlight and show off the finalists and the winners of this contest. Now there's no other big prize or no cash prize or something like that. Not giving away a car or anything, unfortunately. But it's the opportunity to be recognized for the work that you do for the community, and most importantly, the opportunity for more people to become aware of and involved in open source community development. There's so many great things that are already out here in the community that you can take advantage of, but even more so, an opportunity to give back to your fellow developers. And I'll put the link in the video notes to this if this is the first time you're finding out about this. But the reason, well, I was going to say the reason I bring it up, but there's a couple of reasons. I obviously want to promote this event that we have going on, and if you're watching this video, this is exactly the kind of content that we also have as part of Devtoberfest. And chances are good if you're enjoying this video, you hopefully enjoy all these others, and vice versa. But it's also going on right now, and we have a lot of content being produced. I don't want to stop doing the weekly videos as part of my series that I've been doing here on HANA and Cloud Application Programming Model. But at the same time, I know that with so much content for you to consume right now, with all the content that's coming over the next several weeks here as part of Devtoberfest, I'm gonna maybe reduce the length of some of the episodes that I'm doing in this series. That's going to spread things out a little bit more. Instead of just shooting, I had been shooting to fill an hour usually, and whatever content I can put in there, I'm going to try to shrink that down just a little bit, just knowing that that there's so much content also out here for you to look at right now. Now, for our main topic today, let's talk about how we can get our project from where it is right now, which is the SAP Business Application Studio, over to the SAP Web IDE so that we can do some calculation view development. And in order to do that, I have my project all set up here. And if you remember all the way back in the very first episode of the series, I connected it to a Git repository. And that's always a good idea, to make sure that you're persisting your content somewhere else, and you have a full version control system behind it and everything. But as you're going to see here, this is also really critical when you need to move back and forth between different tools. Whether that's moving from the Business Application Studio to maybe Visual Studio Code, or as I'm going to do here today, move over to the SAP Web IDE, you're going to see that Git should make this relatively easy. Now, all along in my development, I have been over here, I've just been sending it over to my personal repository on GitHub. And if we come out here to my repositories, I just have a private repository, so it's not even shared for the whole world to see. But I've just been using this to back up my project state. And it is backed up as of the end of episode 6. I've actually been being a little fancy here. I've been creating a separate branch at the end of each episode in case somebody asks me a question specific to a particular episode. I can even restore the state of my project back to that particular episode at any time. But the main thing I need here is I just need the current state of the project, which I have. And from this point, this is now something I don't need to send it over from the Business Application Studio. I mean, I could, but at this point, if I did a get push, there's nothing for it to send over. If you need to see the steps, like I said, the very first episode in the series, at the end of the episode, once we set up our project, I showed you how to connect to Git and how to push to Git. I'm not going to repeat that since I've already shown that whole process, but I'm all up to date as far as my content in Git matches my content in my Business Application Studio. Now, the main thing I need to do is I need to launch the SAP Web IDE full stack. But if you've been on the SAP Cloud Platform trial, and this is going to be a bit specific to the trial scenario, you might notice that the icon that you might have been used to for launching the Web IDE is now gone and replaced with the Business Application Studio, as most of our development scenarios are now based in the SAP Business Application Studio. But for the HANA scenarios, we still need the SAP Web IDE, particularly if you're going to do calculation view development. So we have to go through a little bit of a different setup. We're in the process of retiring Neo from the SAP Cloud Platform trial, and you might know from the past that the SAP Web IDE full stack, although it can be used to do Cloud Foundry and multi-cloud based development, it itself is a Neo-based application. Therefore, without the link on the home page, it used to be that you would have to go into Neo side of the Cloud Platform trial in order to launch the Web IDE. But there's been a recent addition here to the trial, and that's what I want to walk you through real quick, that will give us access to the SAP Web IDE full stack from the multi-cloud environment, or what used to be referred to as the Cloud Foundry side of the SAP Cloud Platform. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to look at, I'll go ahead into my sub account, which I only have the one for trial. And I'll look at my entitlements. And you'll have to do this just once. I've already done this. I've come in here and I've said configure entitlements and then add service plans. And what you're going to find is that there's actually a new one in here. If I search for Web IDE, you'll see there's an SAP Web IDE for HANA development. And there's just the one plan shared. You want to go ahead and add that to your entitlements, which I have done. That's why it's grayed out there. If I scroll down here, you'll see SAP Web IDE for HANA development trial subscription. So I've added that to my sub account, and now I'm able to go to the subscriptions navigation. And you'll see this is actually where my Business Application Studio subscription is. And before it was on the trial homepage, we would come to this level and we would click Go to Application in order to launch it in the trial environment. But now right alongside there, we have the SAP Web IDE for HANA development. And we can click here, go to Application, and it will work the same way. It will launch the SAP Web IDE full stack. And we'll give that just a moment to load up. And there we are. We're in the SAP Web IDE full stack. No, show me later. I already have it open in another tab. And maybe I can't remember if I logged in here before. No, it doesn't look like I have. So I want to go ahead and configure my connectivity to Cloud Foundry. And I want to connect up because it changed the URL on me there. I must have accidentally clicked in the wrong spot. So let's try this again. Now that I'm targeting the right endpoint for where my trial account is, I created it in the US region. Then I'm able to choose my organization and my space. And I will go ahead and save that. There we are. Preferences have been saved. And while I'm in here, I do believe this is perhaps the first time I've been in on this account and done the setup. Let's just search here. So the other thing I'm going to want to do is make sure, I'm going to turn on HANA development. And we'll save that, which will cause me to restart the IDE. And once the Web IDE restarts, we'll be ready to now do our development. All right, so now we need to pull our existing project in. So we'll get the URL from Git, where we've been storing the persistence of our project. We'll come back over to the Web IDE, and we'll say git clone repository. We will give it that URL, and it is, because it's private, it is going to want me to authenticate in order to make sure I have access to that private repository. And now it's cloning my project. And we've got the whole project here. And it even knows that it's a cloud application programming model project, because we've got the build CDS capability here at the root. Now, I could go ahead and start doing development, but the way my mta.yaml is set up currently, if I go in and I look at it in the code editor, what it's going to do is when it creates the HANA database HDI container instance, when I try to build the database module, that is, it would create a new instance of the database module. And that's what I want to do if I was really deploying the application, but for right now, I actually don't want it to do that. What I want it to do is use my existing service, right? So I'm gonna trick it a little bit here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out some of my current parameters here. I'm going to keep all the rest, properties. And what I want to change this to is, instead of an HDI container, I'm going to tell it that I want type existing service. And then I have to specify a service name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over here and do a CF services. I gotta log in. There we are. Trial. I'll do CF services. And what we want to do, here is our service name, and we want it to reuse that same existing service, right? So I'll go ahead and grab that, and I'll come back over here, and I'll give it the service name. There we are. So now, instead of creating a new HDI container instance, it's going to let us deploy any additions or changes that we make here in the Web IDE into the already existing HDI container. Now, you just have to be a little careful, because HDI is going to do a delta. If I don't keep my sources in sync, if I were to come over here and I would be missing maybe some files that I had already deployed from the Business Application Studio, it will remove those. It will undeploy those. But as long as you're careful about this, it can be a nice way to not get multiple copies of the HDI container instance out there, and allow you to continue to target the same one as you move back and forth between the Business Application Studio and the Web IDE. Now, the key to making all this work, and this is important, is making sure that you don't come to the DB level and doing a build at this level. Because in order to do that, we would have to do a CDS build at the root of our project. And because we've upgraded the CDS version to 4.x, I had some problems trying to do a full CDS build from the Web IDE. And it's really unnecessary anyway, since we're connecting to the already existing container. All of our database artifacts are there. We don't need to build the whole thing again. what we can do is we can just do a selective build on whatever folder that we're adding. And I've tested this out, and this all works great as long as you keep to a selective build. Otherwise, it's going to see that your CDS artifacts are missing, and it'll try to undeploy them, and you'll have a bit of a mess. It'll error out and roll everything back. It won't complete. So if you do it by accident, it's no big deal. But in order for this to work, let's just stay focused on our particular folder that we want to work in. And what I want to do is I want to create in the DB source folder, I want to create another folder, and I'm going to name it models. And I want to have a namespace. Now, we didn't create a namespace on our root of our database module, but when I do calculation views, I kind of like namespaces on the front, particularly if it's going to be consumed externally. A lot of older tools kind of expect that of calculation views, so for compatibility reasons, I like that personally. And if you want to add a namespace in at any folder level, you can do that. You just need to create a .hdi namespace file. And inside here, we're going to say that we want the namespace to be core models and ignore any subfolders so they won't be added automatically to the namespace. Oh, and we can say show hidden files, and then we can see our HDI namespace file. Now, if we do a new calculation view, I just want to see what all I want to put in this calculation view. We are going to call this buyer, and I don't know, buyer details, and let's just create a simple dimension. If we go ahead and say create, get the graphical calculation view editor, and if we go into our projections, we can find, if we just do a search here for business partners. So I want my open SAP master data business partners. So I'm seeing my already deployed container that was deployed from the Business Application Studio. I don't need to deploy it again from the Web IDE because I told the mta.yaml that was already existing HDI instance doesn't need to create it again. It's just connected me to the container that already exists in the database. So now I can just choose OpenSAP MD Business Partners and add it to my projection. Oh, come on. All right, I can't move that around. Oh, because I should not have put that at the projection level, should I? Let's remove that. Because what I wanted to start with, I got a little carried away there. Just wanting to show that. I want to create a join first. There we are. There. I don't like the crooked lines. I like straight lines. So now, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add my, what was it? Business partner. Business partner, and then we are going to add the addresses. There we are. There's that. And then when we bring up the join editor, so our business partner has an address ID, and that address, oh, there we are. And the address ID goes to the unique ID of the addresses table. And this is a one-to-one cardinality. Inner join, that's all good. And then on our mapping, we choose which columns we want. I just need to look over here. So we want our business partner ID. We want the partner role, email, company name. Let's see. Legal form. And address ID. And then from the addresses, we want the city, postal code, street, building, country code, region. Yeah, that should do it. I'm not even sure I need address ID in the output. Let's bring those over. That looks good. ID, I'm just going to double check, make sure I didn't mess anything up. Company name, legal form, city, postal code, street, building, country code, region. Yeah, that looks good. So we've got our columns mapped. I'm just going to save what we got so far. Then we're going to move all that up into our projection. And at the projection level, we're going to say, let's add all the columns over. There we are. And then I think at the semantic level, we're just going to check it. Yeah, I think we're good. I think this is a pretty simple calculation view. I didn't want to go deep into the concepts of calculation view modeling. That isn't really the purpose of today's exercise, nor is that necessary. But I think what I do want to do here real quick, I'll tell you what, I'll do this. I'll pause the video. I want to put nice labels on these. That is one other thing that I want to do, but you don't want to watch me type that. So we'll pause the video for a second, and then we'll come back with nice. There we are. While you were gone, or paused, I should say. All I did is type in nice English descriptions here for the columns, and you're going to see why I did that in just now. I wanted to get those on there so I could come and right mouse click, say modeling, generate properties file. And what this should do, yes, it created a separate buyer properties which extracted the text descriptions. And what this allows me to do is now have translatable descriptions. So I'm just going to create another buyer underscore, I'm going to need my DE dot properties, and I'm basically able to, and I've prepared this in advance, but basically I've got the same header information here that's going to match me to core buyers. Yeah, get them side by side here, saying what metadata to store this with, but now it's going to create a version that is German. So I also have German translated descriptions for my calculation view, which can be used automatically. Just a nice little additional feature of calculation views. Okay, and I think with this we're ready to go ahead and build. So what we want to do is we want to come here to the models folder, and we want to do a build selected files, and that should deploy models and everything within there into our database container. And cross your fingers. There we are, it deployed. If we look at the deploy log, we can see that buyer calculation view was deployed into the database. Table properties German were added. Inserted 12 records into the buyer properties for BIMC descriptions to give us our language dependent descriptions, but it didn't touch the rest of our container. It only focused on that part. It's all good and deployed. And actually, even if we come over to the Database Explorer, which I'm going to do it from here. I could have done it from the Web IDE, but I kind of want to just prove to you that even when we go back and forth here, OpenDBX, I mean, we're opening the same Database Explorer, whether we do it from the Web IDE or whether we do it over here from the Business Application Studio. Just trying to demonstrate that to you. But if we now go to our same HDI container instance, and now when we look at column views, Now we have a buyer calculation view, and we can open data on it. And for instance, we can go ahead and look at the raw data, and there we are. Very simple calculation view, once again, not trying to demonstrate all the ins and outs and capabilities of calculation view development, but just show you sort of the mechanics of how you can pretty easily go over to the Web IDE, do your calculation view development, and then go back. And now that's exactly what we want to do. We want to get these change sources back to Git so we can get them over into the Business Application Studio where we want to continue doing development. So I'm just going to open the Git panel here, and I'm actually going to I don't want to send everything over. I don't want to send over my mta.yaml, for instance, or the changes the Web IDE automatically made to my git ignore. So you can choose which files you want to send across. So I actually just want the DB source models, where we added the namespace, the calculation view, and its translations. I'm going to say add buyer Calc View, and there's the master, and I will do a commit and push. It wants to know. There we are. And it is pushing that back to Git. Just those selected changes. Successful. If I were to come here to Git and look at it, yes, 12 seconds ago, it was updated, but just the DB module, not the mta.yaml. And now if I were to come back to, I lost it, where's my other, there it is, my other window. I can come back to the, come back here, and do a, and I'm in the root, let's just, there we are. Put in my credentials again. And now it has pulled over the namespace, buyer, and the properties files and put them in my project. So if I come back here, and now when I look in my DB folder and source, now I have a models, and I've got my calculation view, which from here I can only see it in its raw XML format, but now I've moved pretty seamlessly back and forth between the two development environments without having to do big rebuilds of the container. I've got that one shared instance of the container. So although not an ideal workflow, certainly not horrible, pretty easy to move back and forth when you need to, if you just need to bounce over to the Web IDE to do a little bit of calculation view development. Now the last thing I want to do is I want to add this calculation view into my cloud application programming model, my CDS model. So in order to do that, I need to be able to do just like we did with the S-Flight tables and the user table from our other database module. I have to be able to create this sort of proxy entity for it. But of course, we have the namespace on the front of it, and that namespace is going to make the name incompatible with the cloud application program model entity names. But there's a little workaround, and that's part of the reason why I intentionally added a namespace on it, because that's a common thing you run into, but it's going to force us to have to deal with that. There's a simple little solution in that we can just create a synonym. So synonyms aren't just for things outside of your container. They can also be to objects inside of your container. So I'm just going to go ahead and say new file. I'm going to call this local.hdb synonym. And I'm going to go ahead and create a synonym for our full calculation view name, which is core.models.buyer. And I'm going to give it a new alias with a simpler name just called buyer. And let's go ahead and save that. And we'll go to our DB folder, and we will do an npm start to deploy that into the database. And it sees just one modified file. Even though we've just newly added that calculation view to the container on the server side, it's not new. It already knows about it, so it didn't try to redeploy it. It only created our synonym. So that is good. One modified file. And now that we have that synonym, what we're able to do is go to our CDS model layer. One second here while I find my sources. There we are. And if we go to database module, schema, and we'll use the same import here where we imported the persistent exist for our user data local. And instead we will now add a persistence exist for buyer. There we are. And I'm trying to think here. Just looking for one other. All right, we'll do that. And now when we do the other thing we want to do is look in our, so we can test and make sure this works. We already have buyer as a view. Well, we don't need to pull it into the service. I suppose we could pull it into the service just to test and make sure it works. But I think this would be good enough. If we just do let's go back up a level. Do a CDS build. What did I get there? And that was an interesting error. That took me a moment to figure out. But if I roll back here, I'll share with you what happened. If you remember, at the beginning of the last episode, I updated to Cloud Application Programming Model 4.x, the latest that was available. And I also needed to update the CDS DK, the development kit, in my workspace. Because that's where all the commands are coming from now. As soon as I did a CDS version, I noticed it's telling me I need to install the latest version of CDS DK, development kit, again. So what it seems like is my workspace, I guess when it stopped and it restored it, my content came back, but it must have taken it back to the base version that's globally installed of the CDS DK, the development kit. So I needed to do an npm install global on CDS DK again, and as soon as I did that, I was fine then. I checked my version, but then I just did another CDS build, and after I updated, it worked perfectly fine. So somewhere in overnight, not using the Business Application Studio, the workspace goes to sleep. Some things get set back to standard settings, and that update that I had done manually to the CDS version, I had to repeat. So that's a good little thing to watch out for there. So now that I'm back to the current version and it built again perfectly fine, just to test, I'll go into my DB folder and I'll do an npm start. I don't think there's much of anything to deploy into the database. No. And we're good. I know that import there hit a little error. It was actually good to go through, though. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up another episode. What we've seen today is how we can go back over to the SAP Web IDE in order to do things like calculation view development. We saw the new process if you're using the SAP Cloud Platform Trial to both enable and start the Web IDE now that the Neo retirement from the trial has begun. We saw how we can use Git to share our current state of our sources between the Business Application Studio and the Web IDE. A little trick there with editing the mta.yaml in the Web IDE so that the HDI container instances are not recreated when we build, but instead we connect to the same ones that we've already built from the Business Application Studio, and then how we can add our calculation views and build just that folder or just those certain development artifacts. They deploy into that already existing container, and then we were able to go back over to the Business Application Studio, do a pull on our sources from Git and get those changes that we did over in the Web IDE, but then just continue our development as we had done. So, like I said earlier, not a perfect workflow having to switch between two different development tools, but also once you kind of know the tips and tricks and the ways around here, not that terribly bad either to just be able to bounce over to that other tool, do a quick Git pull, make your changes in that environment, build into the database, go back to Git, and then bounce back over to the other development tool. We even took our calculation view all the way through to the cloud application programming model, dealt with the using a synonym to get around the namespace. So I think we covered a lot of typical problems that you run into when well, first of all, trying to do calculation view development in HANA Cloud and having to move between the two different development environments currently, but also some of the intricacies of using calculation views in a mixed environment with the cloud application programming model as well.